Time at New Delhi, with the theme Vasudhaiva.
2.1 India and G20. Why in news? India recently held the presidency of the G20 summit for the first time at New Delhi, with the theme, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, One Future. 14 www.visioneers.inv.visioneers.in Copyright symbol Vision IS. Key outcomes of the G20 summit. Times unanimous adoption of the G20 New Delhi Leaders Joint Declaration. Times launch of the Global Biofuel Alliance, GBA, to increase. Times unanimous adoption of the G20 New Delhi Leaders Joint Declaration. Times launch of the Global Biofuel Alliance, GBA, to increase the consumption of biofuels. Times Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, to establish India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. Times formal inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20. Times other outcomes or proposal to launch a G-20 satellite mission for environment and climate observation, with an aim to help the countries of the Global South. O global regulatory framework for crypto assets and use of artificial intelligence responsibly. O consensus on G20 framework for the PIR, Global Digital Public Infrastructure Repository respectively. Asterisk important outcomes and declarations of the G20 summit have been discussed in detail in the subsequent articles. Significance of G20. Times supporting global financial stability. It plays a key role in promoting global financial stability through financial regulation, crisis prevention, and management. Times addressing global development challenges. It has made efforts to address a range of development challenges, including poverty reduction, infrastructure financing, and sustainable development. Times human resource development and employment. At the 2014 summit in Brisbane, G20 leaders committed to reduce the gender gap in labor force participation by 25% by the year 2025 compared to 2012, the 25x25 goal. Times recast bilateral ties. Bilateral meetings on the summit's sideline have occasionally led to major international agreements. Significance of G20 presidency for India. Times showcase leadership. India got the chance to prove its leadership role in steering discussions, building consensus as well as offering solutions to address developmental and geopolitical issues. Times voice of the Global South. Through its presidency, India was able to embed priorities of the Global South in the larger global conversation and advance its own credentials as a voice of the Global South. OEG, India's initiative led to the African Union being accepted as a permanent member of the G20. Times economic opportunities. India's G20 presidency is expected to translate into trade and investment opportunities for Indian businesses' global expansion. Times expand India's footprint. By hosting the summit, India was able to demonstrate its contemporary technology advancement and its heritage, culture and traditions, enhancing India's stature and status in global politics. Times build trust. India's heritage of being the moderating influence helped in building consensus and lessen the East-West polarization and the North-South divide. Times steering global agenda and reshaping world order. India used the opportunity to reshape the global agenda based on its priorities and promote its interests on the international stage. 15 www.visioneers.inv.visioneers.in Copyright symbol Vision IS. Challenges. Times divergent interests and priorities among member countries. This can make it difficult to reach a consensus on key issues and to promote a coherent approach. Times lack of effective power. G20 is not a legally binding institution. Times geopolitical tensions. Geopolitical tensions between G20 members undermine cooperation and make it difficult to achieve consensus on important issues. Times inadequate response to global challenges. The G20 has faced criticism for its perceived lack of action on key global challenges, such as climate change and inequality. Times limited accountability and transparency. It operates largely behind closed doors, with limited opportunities for public scrutiny and accountability, and lacks a formal charter. Times rising protectionism. There is a growing trend towards protectionism and trade tensions between major economies. Way forward. Times inclusivity. It must reach out to non-member states and non-state actors, giving voice and consideration to their concerns. Times avoiding internal conflicts. Collective action and problem solving should be encouraged that transcends traditionally like-minded groups of countries. Times effective implementation. Summit leaders should solidify the forum's role through swift action on promises. Times maintaining continuity. Promote collective action on a sustained basis and should maintain continuity on issues taken up across presidencies. 2 January 2001 New Delhi Declaration. Key highlights of the New Delhi Declaration. Theme details accelerating progress on SDGs. Times endorsed the G20 principles on harnessing data for development, D4D, and welcomed the decision to launch the Data for Development Capacity Building Initiative. Times strengthening the Agricultural Market Information System, AMIS, and the Group on Earth Observations Global Agricultural Monitoring, GEOGLAM, for greater transparency to avoid food price volatility. Times emphasis on adopting a One Health approach. Strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth. Times G20 2023 Financial Inclusion Action Plan, FIAP, aimed at advancing financial inclusion for individuals and MSMEs. Times adoption of G20 Generic Framework for Mapping Global Value Chains, GVC, to help members identify risks and build resilience. Times establishment of the Startup 20 Engagement Group. Women Empowerment Times creation of a full-fledged working group on women's empowerment to prioritize gender equality, women empowerment, and leadership. Multilateral institutions for the 21st century. Times Agreement on UNGA 75-1, UNSC reforms, for the first time in G20. Times Roadmap for implementing the recommendations of the G20 independent review of the Multilateral Development Bank's Capital Adequacy Framework. Technological Transformation and Digital Public Infrastructure, DPI. Times Proposal of the One Future Alliance, OFA, a voluntary initiative for supporting implementing DPI in low and low-middle income countries. Times India plans to build and maintain a global digital public infrastructure repository, DPIR, a virtual repository of DPI, voluntarily shared by G20 members. Times Joint Roadmap to support a coordinated and comprehensive policy and regulatory framework for crypto assets. International Taxation Times reaffirms commitment to twin pillars of international package. Profit allocation and nexus and global minimum taxation. Green Development Times encourage efforts to triple renewable energy capacity by 2030. Pact for a Sustainable Future. Times Recognition. Times built consensus on Ukraine issue, in line with the UN Charter. States agreed to uphold the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Times addressed the adverse impact of Russia-Ukraine war on global economy and welcome constructive initiatives that support a comprehensive, just, and durable peace in Ukraine. Promotion of thematic roadmaps and principles. Times Jaipur call for action for enhancing MSMEs' access to information to promote the integration of MSMEs into international trade. Times Chennai high-level principles for a sustainable and resilient blue ocean-based economy. Times Gandhinagar Implementation Roadmap, GIR, and Gandhinagar Information Platform, GIP, for strengthening the G20 Global Land Initiative. Our G20 Global Land Initiative aims to prevent, halt and reverse land degradation with an ambition to reduce degraded land by 50% by 2040. Times Deccan High-Level Principles on Food Security and Nutrition 2023. Times Goa Roadmap for Tourism as a vehicle for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals to achieve sustainable tourism. It has 5 priorities: green tourism, digitalization, skills, tourism MSMEs, and destination management. 2nd January 2002 India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC. Times the Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, to establish the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor, IMEC, was signed between India, US, Saudi Arabia, European Union, UAE, France, Germany, and Italy. Times the IMEC will consist of railroad, ship-to-rail networks, road and sea, and road transport routes, and networks, extending across 2 corridors. The East Corridor, connects India to the Arabian Gulf. The Northern Corridor, connects the Arabian Gulf to Europe. Times aim, to provide a reliable and cost-effective cross-border ship-to-rail transit network enabling goods and services to transit to, from, and between India, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and Europe. Along the railway route, participants also intend to enable the laying of cable for electricity and digital connectivity, as well as pipe for clean hydrogen export. Times the project forms part of the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, PGII. PGII was announced in 2021 during the G7 summit in the UK and is seen as a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. 17 www.visionia, other projects under PGII, Trans-African Corridor. Significance of IMEC. Times crucial milestone in the shift of global order towards Eurasia. It signifies the commitment of the US, Europe, and emerging powers such as India, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE to promoting a more balanced and interconnected Eurasian order. Times trade facilitation and accessibility. It would create a consolidated trade route that will reduce trade costs, promote market access, and encourage investment opportunities between the participating countries. Times enhanced regional connectivity, improved transportation infrastructure, cross-border cooperation, energy supply, and logistical efficiencies will enhance regional connectivity. Times economic unity. It is expected to act as an effective medium of economic integration between India, West Asia and Europe. Times diplomatic collaboration and geopolitical stability. Close economic ties resulting from the corridor will incentivize cooperation on security, counter-terrorism, and regional stability. Times secure regional supply chains. It will make the global supply chain more resilient. Times sustainable development. IMEC also aims to promote clean energy development and export, expand energy grids and telecommunications, advance clean energy technologies, and improve internet access for all. IMEC versus China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. Times in terms of objectives, both mega transnational projects are similar. Times China's new Silk Route is larger in terms of scale. Announced in 2013, China has signed BRI cooperation documents with more than 150 countries and over 30 international organizations and created over 3,000 projects. Expected benefits of IMEC over BRI parameters. IMEC BRI design based on collaborative consultations with all participants. Centrally designed. Benefits for the common benefit of all in the region primarily serves China's interests. Employment focus on generating employment for the local population mainly generates employment for Chinese companies. Debt practices proposes to follow the best international debt practices criticized for putting unsustainable debt burdens on participating nations. Challenges and considerations. Times complex geopolitics of the region. The corridor extends across diverse nations with varying political dynamics, interests, and previous tensions. E.g., uncertainties surrounding Saudi Arabia and Israel relations may hamper cooperation. Times existing rivalries. As a strategic competitor, China may seek to divert trade and investments towards its own corridors, potentially undermining the effectiveness of IMEC. Or further, IMEC corridor, being an alternative land route, may pose a potential threat to Egypt's dominance in the region, diverting trade away from the Suez Canal. Times logistical challenges. Establishing a multimodal network across multiple countries with diverse geographical terrains, regulatory procedures, transportation protocols, financial mechanisms and infrastructural capabilities will be challenging. Times security concerns. The region is susceptible to various security threats, including terrorism, conflicts, and political instability. Times challenge with multimodal routes. The IMEC consists of land and sea sections, which may escalate cost in comparison to exclusively land or maritime routes. Times financial commitments. There is a lack of commitment regarding the financial cost, which is expected to be finalized in the coming months. Significant 18 www.visionias.inf.visionias.in copyright symbol vision 18 www. Significance of IMEC for India. Times expected to speed up trade between India and Europe by up to 40%. Times reduce logistics costs as well as boost trade in goods and services between India and other countries. Times boost to Act West policy of India. 18 www.visionias.inf. Way forward. Times establish diplomatic dialogue and a unified vision among all participating nations to mitigate potential conflicts. Times harmonize regulatory frameworks such as customs procedures and enhance financial connectivity. Times strengthen regional cooperation on defense, security by sharing intelligence, and creating joint initiatives to counter security risks. Times create robust financial framework to attract investments from multiple stakeholders, including governments, international organizations, and private sector entities. Reasons for India's rising interest in the Middle East. Times improved security conditions and enhanced political stability. Diplomatic negotiations within nations and political stability in the region will allow India to maintain robust relations with all three poles of power, Israel, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Times geopolitical interests. India has strategic interests in the Middle East due to its proximity to important maritime trade routes and its role in countering terrorism and extremism. Times energy security. The Middle East is a major source of India's energy imports, particularly oil and natural gas. Times diaspora. There are more than 8 million Indians, or people of Indian origin, working in the larger Middle East region. Or the Indian workforce in the Middle East sends home more than $50 billion a year in remittances. Times defense. India has strong bilateral agreements in the region, such as the defense agreement with Qatar, and intelligence sharing with the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and Israel. 2nd January 2003 African Union, a permanent member of the G20. Times African Union became the second regional organization to become a permanent member of the G2. Significance of inclusion of African Union in the G20. For the G20 for India for Africa. Times utilize Africa's enormous potential in mitigating climate change. Africa is home to 60% of the world's renewable energy assets and more than 30% of the minerals important to renewable and low-carbon technologies. Times boost credibility of its policies and decisions. Ours inclusion enhances G20's capacity to devise inclusive and Times championing the cause of Global South. India's successful endorsement for inclusion of AU in the G20 solidifies its image as the voice of the Global South. Times align with India's aspirations. The step aligns with India's own global aspirations to foster a multipolar world and a more equitable and representative international order. Times inclusivity. It gives more leadership and voice to African countries on issues like global tax reforms, debt relief, climate change discussions, etc. Times correcting imbalance. Africa has remained a passive receiver rather than an active. 19 www.visionias. Equitable solutions that are truly beneficial to the global community. Times reinvent its image. It makes G20 more representative, repurposing the G20 to be the vehicle for building a fairer, more prosperous, and sustainable. Times permanent seat in UNSC. India is keen to garner support from AU for permanent membership of the UNSC. Times resource diversification. Africa is a resource-rich continent dominated by commodities like crude oil, gas, pulses and lentils, leather, gold, and other metals. Contributed to discussions shaping its economic destiny. Times signal toward growth of Africa. It signals the rise of a continent otherwise framed as a victim of war, extremism, hunger, and disaster. India's efforts in promoting integration with the African continent. Times the Pan-African E-Network project. PANAP. It is an information and communications technology (ICT) project that seeks to connect the member states of the Union through a satellite and fiber optic network to India and to each other. Times India-Africa Forum Summit. It aims for greater cooperation between India and Africa. Times the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program. It is the leading capacity-building platform of the Ministry of External Affairs active in the African Union. Times Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. It seeks to develop infrastructure and digital connectivity in Africa through Indo-Japan collaboration. 2nd January 2004 Global Biofuel Alliance. Times it was launched by India along with the leaders of Singapore, Bangladesh, Italy, USA, Brazil, Argentina, Mauritius and UAE. Or the alliance will also act as a central repository of knowledge and an expert hub. Times aim to serve as a catalytic platform, fostering global collaboration for the advancement and widespread adoption of biofuels. Times present GBA members include 07 G20 countries, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, India, Italy, South Africa, USA. 04 G20 invitee countries, Bangladesh, Singapore, Mauritius, UAE. 08 non-G20 countries, Iceland, Kenya, Guyana, Paraguay, Seychelles, Sri Lanka, Uganda, and Finland. 012 international organizations including World Bank, Asian Development Bank, World Economic Forum, International Energy Agency, etc. Asterisk to read more about biofuels, kindly refer to Article 5 January 2004 Biofuel Opportunity in 19 Decarbonization of May 2023 Monthly Current Affairs Magazine. Significance of GBA. Times develop a market for biofuels. GBA will ensure a stable supply of eco-fuels and create a virtual marketplace connecting industries, countries, and tech providers, enhancing demand-supply mapping. Times robust standards. It will facilitate the development, adoption, and implementation of internationally recognized standards and regulations to incentivize biofuels adoption and trade. 20 www.visionias.in. Times contribute to climate efforts. International Energy Agency, IEA, estimates that global sustainable biofuel production would need to triple by 2030 to put the world's energy system on track towards net zero emissions by 2050. Times decarbonize transport sector. The transport sector is responsible for approximately 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions. Times awareness. It will help raise awareness about biofuels' role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Challenges for GBA. Times lack of clear definition. There is a lack of consensus on what sustainable fuels are, and countries don't think biofuels are sustainable. Times technology transfer. Developing countries may encounter resistance from developed nations due to concerns about technological secrecy. Times geopolitical contestation. Oil producing nations might not favor the alliance. Times slow growth. The deployment of biofuels is not accelerating fast enough, especially compared to other renewable resources like solar and wind. Times production-related challenges, limited availability of quality feedstock, effect on food production and prices, changes in cropping pattern, lack of cost-effective technologies, etc. may hamper sustainable production of biofuels. Conclusion. The Alliance will have to develop sustainable long-term plans, make sufficient investments, foster innovation, resolve supply chain issues, quickly resolve any disputes, and encourage collaboration. 2.2 India as a global unifier. Why in the news? The theme for India's G20 presidency is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family, one future. Idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Times meaning. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam means the world is one family. It affirms the value of all life, human, animal, plant, and microorganisms and their interconnectedness on the planet Earth and in the wider universe. Or the Upanishadic philosophy, of which Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is a representation, emphasizes the divinity of every living being. It believes that every human being is divine, thus there is no cause for conflict. Times progressive thought. This is an all-embracing outlook that encourages us to progress as one universal family, transcending borders, languages, and ideologies. Times origins. The phrase Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is made up of 3 Sanskrit words, Vasudha, earth world, Iva, like, and Kutumbakam, large extended family. Or the verse finds mention in Maha Upanishad, and is further referred to in the Hitopadesha, written by Narayana Pandit. Or the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is also reflected in the Vedic saying, Yatra Vishwam Bhavti Eka Nidam. Or, the world is a nest. How India is acting as a global unifier through this ideology. India is driving solutions towards key global issues. This is reflected in the following efforts, value systems and cultural elements. 21 www.visionias.in. Times environment conservation. At the root of Vasudhaiva is Vasudha, our planet Earth. India is promoting a sustainable environment with its mission life, lifestyle for environment, net zero emission targets, reclamation of degraded lands, and multilateral initiatives. Times digital public infrastructure. DPI India has established its foundational DPI consisting of identity, payment and data exchange layers. India is helping developing countries to adapt, build and scale DPI to unlock inclusive growth. Times energy transition. India is supporting global energy transition through initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance and Global Biofuel Alliance. Times inclusive multilateralism. India is consistently pushing to boost multilateralism by pursuing reform of global institutions. In this pursuit, India held the Voice of the Global South Summit and pushed for the inclusion of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20. Times capacity building. Under India's Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program, ITEC program, over 200 000 professionals from 161 partner countries have benefited since 1964. India pushed for the launch of the Data for Development Capacity Building Initiative for the development of the Global South. Times Yoga. Pursuant to India's quest, the UN General Assembly declared June 21 as the International Day of Yoga. It fosters a culture of inclusiveness, fraternity and global family uniting humanity. It is also an example of India's soft power, ability to persuade others to perform something without any form of coercion. Times culture. India's G20 presidency provided ground for showcasing unique and diverse cultures from different regions and nations to strengthen relationships, enhance socio-economic cooperation and promote national interest. What are the challenges? Times balancing national interest. There is a competitive and conflictual side of international relations. It considers nation-states as the principal actors and national interests as paramount. It remains a challenging endeavor to balance global concerns with national interests. Times different power centers. According to some, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is not a peaceful construct but a dysfunctional one with different power centers vying to secure their interests even at the risk of trampling over common values. Or also, it is not clear that in the presently emerging multipolar world how will power be shared among the various leaders and centers. Times enforcement issue. Dealing with a world which follows the philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam would require not only the ability to develop common norms to address contentious issues but also the political, economic, and military prowess to enforce these agreed upon norms. Times hard power. Hard power of nation-states is counterintuitive to the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is based on the principle of self-restraint. Times identity politics. Movements of identity politics that promise a return to traditional forms of collective identities based on race, nationality, religion or caste rely on the simplistic binary of us and them. Or such movements create an other, which is usually a rival social group that is vilified, thus directly negating the core philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Way forward. Times coexistence. A strong spirit of coexistence is required to overcome barriers of knowledge, distance, and language among others. Such spirit can be imbibed through more interconnectedness and dialogue among nations. Times reinvigorated multilateralism. There is a need for a greater push on effective, inclusive and networked multilateralism to give voice to the marginalized world. Times promotion of cultural elements, cultural exchanges among countries and the promotion of the idea of the world as a single entity with diverse cultural centers can help. Times inclusive development, supporting the development and empowerment of developing and least developed countries especially in Africa through trade, investment, aid, capacity building and technology transfer. 22 www.visionias.inf.visionia 2.3 India, the voice of Global South. Why in news? India used the platform of its G20 presidency to champion the cause of Global South. More in news. Times India became an advocate for the Global South during G20 by making the following efforts or supported the inclusion of the African Union in G20 as a permanent member, or included issues of the Global South in G20 discussions, such as reforms in the Multilateral Development Bank, MDB, debt restructuring for countries facing high levels of sovereign debt, resource mobilization for climate finance, etc. Or G20 theme, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, One Earth, One Family, One Future, symbolized the inclusion of developing countries. What is Global South? Times it refers to countries often characterized as developing, less, or underdeveloped. Or these countries are primarily located in the southern hemisphere, largely in Africa, Asia and Latin America. Times similarly, economically developed countries such as the United States, Canada, Europe, Russia, Australia and New Zealand constitute Global North. Times the concept of the Global South can be traced back to the Brandtner Report of 1980, which proposed a division between North and South countries based on their technological advancement, GDP, and standard of living. Challenges faced by the Global South. Times underrepresentation in global forums, as seen by their exclusion from the UN Security Council's permanent membership. 23 www.visionias.inf.visionias. Times geopolitical conflicts of the Global North impact global decision-making process, with concerns of the Global South like rising prices of oil, food price volatility etc. taking a backseat. Or e.g., the Ukraine conflict led to inflation in food and oil prices which adversely affected countries in the Global South. Times diverging approach of the Global North on normative issues, e.g., there is a lack of consensus between Global North and Global South over the interpretation of democracy, human rights, agenda for climate governance, etc. Times Global South is disproportionately impacted by most of the global challenges including climate change. How has India positioned itself as the leader of the Global South? Times gaining goodwill by utilizing multidirectional diplomatic engagements and economic and technological growth trajectory to tackle global crisis situations affecting the Global South. Or e.g., India's Vaccine Maitri initiative provided medicines and vaccines to over 100 countries. Times democratizing climate governance in the global arena, for example, by supporting common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR, in negotiations, advocating for climate finance from developed nations, etc. Times pushing reform in multilateral institutions to make them more inclusive, for example, through its demand of broadening of the UN Security Council's permanent membership. Times providing alternative approach on normative issues like democracy and human rights. Times capacity building of the Global South in various areas such as human resources, technology, energy, etc. Or e.g., the recently launched Indian Capacity Building Initiative aims to share India's development experiences, best practices and expertise with partner countries in the Global South through capacity building and training programs. Times creating platforms for collaborative dialogue, e.g., Virtual Voice of Global South Summit in January 2023. Challenges for India in leading the Global South. Times balancing national interests while fulfilling international obligations as a leader requires strategic balancing. Or for example, India's recent ban on rice exports has been criticized by many countries for exporting food price inflation. Times limited resources to adequately support countries of the Global South. Times Chinese competition and interference, primarily in development finance, infrastructure and trade. Or it is further pushing its geopolitical agenda through economic aid and debt diplomacy. Way forward. Times ensuring that the concerns of the Global South are acknowledged and accounted for at multilateral forums. OEG, India can create inclusive dialogue by utilizing its five-pillared approach for multilateral forums: Samman, respect, Samvad, dialogue, Sahyog, cooperation, Shanti, peace, and Samriddhi, prosperity. Times develop synergies in the global south on trade, technology, tourism, and resources by investing in connectivity infrastructure and technology transfer. Times reforming global trade and finance institutions to increase financial independence for the global south countries and improve access to capital. Or for instance, reform in the World Trade Organization, WTO, would give them equitable and rules-based access to world trade. 24 WW Times India's proposal to re-energize the world. India has called for a global agenda of 4 rupees: respond, recognize, respect and reform. This means responding to the priorities of the global south, recognizing the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, respecting the sovereignty of all nations, and reforming international institutions to make them more relevant. Related news: Times India reiterated its commitment towards Global South at G77 plus China Summit in Cuba. Times Group of 77, G-77, is called G77 plus China because while China works closely with the group, it does not officially consider itself a full member. 2.4 India ASEAN. Why in the news? Recently, the Prime Minister of India attended the 20th ASEAN India Summit and the 18th East Asia Summit, EAS, in Jakarta, Indonesia. 25 www.vision. Key highlights of ASEAN India Summit. Times India presented a 12-point proposal for strengthening India-ASEAN cooperation. Some of them are: establishing multimodal connectivity and economic corridor linking Southeast Asia, India, West Asia, Europe. Sharing India's digital public infrastructure stack with ASEAN partners. ASEAN India Fund for Digital Future focuses on cooperation in digital transformation and financial connectivity. Invitation to ASEAN countries to join the Global Center for Traditional Medicine and Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. ATIGA, India emphasized the need to complete the review of the ASEAN India Trade in Goods Agreement, ATIGA, in a time-bound manner. ATIGA review is expected to make ATIGA more user-friendly, simple, and trade facilitative for businesses as well as support for sustainable and inclusive growth. Key highlights of the East Asia Summit. Times reviewed the implementation of the EAS Plan of Action, POA, 2018 to 2022 and welcomed the adoption of the new EAS POA, 2024 to 2028. Times India reaffirmed ASEAN centrality in the Indo-Pacific and called for ensuring a free, open and rules-based Indo-Pacific. Significance of India-ASEAN relations. Times Geopolitical, ASEAN is central to India's Act East policy and Indo-Pacific vision and contributes to the security and growth for all in the region, SAGA, initiative. Times Regional Integration and Multilateral Cooperation, India's engagement with ASEAN is part of its broader commitment to regional integration and multilateralism. ASEAN serves as a platform for dialogue and cooperation on various regional and global issues. Times Economic Cooperation, India and ASEAN registered a bilateral trade of USD 131.5 billion in 2022 to 23. The trade with ASEAN accounted for 11.3% of India's global trade in 2022 to 23. Times Development of Northeast, connectivity through the India-Myanmar-Thailand Trilateral Highway, IMT, and the Kaldan Multimodal Project etc., have led to greater connectivity with the Northeast and ensured progress and development in the region. Times Security, partnership between ASEAN and India helps in countering terrorism, violent extremism and transnational crimes through the implementation of the ASEAN Plan of Action in Combating Transnational Crime, 2016 to 2025. Times China Factor, countering China has been a major driving factor behind India's interactions with Southeast Asian countries. China releasing a new map and falsely claiming territories, land and maritime, of India and Southeast Asian countries would further add to the shared concerns between India and ASEAN. Times Soft Power, for India to become a civilizational superpower, apart from economic and military might, Southeast Asia is a natural destination to practice soft power. Southeast Asia shares cultural commonalities with India, including temples, yoga, epics like the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and the practice of Ayurveda. Concerns associated with India-ASEAN relations. Times Great Power Competition, Southeast Asia is increasingly becoming a theater of great power competition between the United States, US, and China because of its location in the broader Indo-Pacific region. About ASEAN India Trade in Goods Agreement, ATIGA, Times ATIGA was signed in 2009 and entered into force in 2010. Times it is sometimes referred to as ASEAN India Free Trade Agreement. Times under the agreement, India and ASEAN decided to open their markets by progressively reducing and eliminating duties on more than 76% goods and committed to liberalize tariffs on over 90% of goods. Key highlight of EAS-POA, 2024 to 2028, Times mainstreaming and implementation of the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, AOIP. Times reinforces the centrality of ASEAN and ASEAN-led mechanisms as the driving force within the EAS. Times emphasis on strengthening partnerships through cross-sectoral collaborations that includes efforts in furthering the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. 26 www.visionias.in. Times widening trade deficit, there is a disproportionate trade balance favoring ASEAN due to non-tariff barriers, import regulations etc. The trade deficit has widened to USD 43.57 billion in 2022 to 23 from USD 25.76 billion in 2021 to 22. It was just $5 billion in 2010 to 11. Times competing regional agreements, the engagement of ASEAN countries with other regional agreements like the RCEP and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, diverts attention and resources away from the ASEAN-India relationship. Times lack of market access and connectivity, physical and digital connectivity between India and ASEAN countries remains limited, affecting trade, investment, business-to-business and people-to-people ties. Times delayed projects. Since the conception of Project IMT Trilateral Highway in 2002, it has faced various delays and challenges, including political instability in Myanmar and financial issues. Now, it is expected to be completed by 2027. Times China factor. India's primary strategic focus in Southeast Asia is countering China's influence. However, India has yet to offer a compelling alternative, allowing China to maintain its dominance in both the economic and strategic realms within Southeast Asia. Way forward. Times Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Strengthening comprehensive strategic partnership could ensure greater coordination between India's Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, IPOI, and ASEAN's ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, AOIP. Times Maritime Cooperation. Greater maritime cooperation with ASEAN would complement ASEAN centrism, which is a core principle of India's as well as the Quad's policy towards the Indo-Pacific region. Times Value Chain Integration. Enhance focus on a range of policy measures including trade facilitation, liberalization of goods, services and capital, competition policy, and infrastructure quality that promote value chain integration. Times Enhanced Connectivity. Expediting the IMT Trilateral Highway project, building an economic corridor along it and extending it to Cambodia, Laos PDR, and Vietnam can boost connectivity vis-a-vis trade with ASEAN. Times Cultural and Educational Exchanges. Promote cultural understanding and people-to-people ties through cultural events, tourism, and educational exchanges. 2.5 Abraham Accords. Why in the news? 3 years have been completed since the signing of the Abraham Accords. About Abraham Accords. Times Abraham Accords refers to the collective agreement between the United States, US, the United Arab Emirates, UAE, and Israel that was signed in September 2020. These accords were later extended to the countries of Sudan, Bahrain and Morocco. Times the agreement marks the first normalization of ties between Israel and an Arab country since Jordan in 1994. Egypt was the first Arab state to sign a peace deal with Israel in 1979. Jordan signed a peace pact in 1994. Times as per the agreement, the UAE and Bahrain will establish embassies, exchange ambassadors, cooperate and work together with Israel across a range of sectors, including tourism, trade, healthcare and security. 27. Times the accords were called the Abraham Accords as the three major monotheistic religions of the world, Islam, Christianity and Judaism, all find their roots in Prophet Abraham. Significance of Abraham Accords. Times stability in the region. Many experts opine that the Abraham Accords are designed to create a collective security framework for enhancing stability and preventing conflict in the Persian Gulf. Times solution to Israel-Palestine issue. The Abraham Accords can advance the two-state solution by opening channels of communication between the Arab states of the Gulf and Israel. Amid the recent Israel-Palestine conflict, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, UAE, both signatories of the Abraham Accords, are calling for de-escalation among all involved parties to safeguard the well-being and lives of the people involved. Times economic significance. The trade between Israel and other West Asian countries increased by 74% between 2021 and 2022. Times religious significance. The Abraham Accords also opened the door for communities to visit the historic religious sites in Israel such as the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Times cooperation in technology. For instance, the Prosperity Green and Blue Agreement between Israel, the UAE, and Jordan determined that a solar field to supply electricity to Israel would be established in Jordan, while in return, a desalination plant in Israel would deliver water to Jordan. Times education. A number of Emirati students have enrolled in Israeli universities. Bahrain has also embraced the prospects for shared educational activities and signed a number of agreements with Israel to advance student and professor exchanges. Emerging challenges for Abraham Accords. Times changing geopolitical alliances in West Asia. The region of West Asia attracts the world because of the existence of the main source of energy. Britain and France ruled over Arab countries from the beginning of the 20th century till decades. After the Second World War, the US started to grab West Asia in its command. The growing involvement of Russia and China has introduced new complexities to the region's political landscape. Times Palestinian issue. The Abraham Accords were criticized for not effectively addressing the fundamental causes of the Palestinian conflict. Recently, Gaza-based group Hamas mounted a mass-scale attack against Israel. Times antipathy towards Iran. The Abraham Accords were perceived to be motivated by shared concerns over Iran's nuclear program and regional influence. Times China's Saudi-Iran diplomacy. The China-backed Saudi-Iranian deal is seen as a setback to efforts to build a regional anti-Iran coalition, a main driver of the Abraham Accords. It could delay Israel's attempt to normalize ties with Saudi Arabia. Russia views China's growing diplomatic assertiveness in the Middle East, which was evidenced by its brokering of the Saudi Arabia-Iran normalization deal, as a positive step toward a multipolar regional order. Times internal opposition. In the countries that signed the accords, there were segments of the population that opposed normalization with Israel. Decades of mistrust and past conflicts mean that while government-to-government relations might improve, people-to-people ties would take longer to develop. Significance for India Times regional cooperation. Accords have laid the foundation for expanded regional and multinational cooperation. A concrete illustration of this is the establishment of the I2U2 group, formed by Israel, India, the UAE, and the US. The focus of I2U2 will be on areas such as water, energy, transportation, space, health, and food security. Times economic opportunities. The normalization of relations between Israel and Arab countries could potentially open up new economic opportunities for India. The vibrant Indian diaspora in the Gulf now has the convenience of direct flights between the UAE, Bahrain, and Israel. 28 WW. Conclusion. The Abraham Accords represent a significant step towards fostering peace and stability in West Asia. By establishing diplomatic relations and economic cooperation between Israel and several Arab nations, it has opened doors for increased regional cooperation. However, in the context of the recent Israel-Palestine conflict, it is difficult to envision how the Abraham Accords and their expansion can achieve peace or stability, even in the short term. Sustainable peace requires addressing the root causes of conflict, which is the Israel and Palestine issue. A detailed analysis of the Israel-Palestine conflict and situation in West Asia will be covered in the subsequent editions. 2.6 India-Saudi Arabia relations. Why in the news? Recently, the Indian Prime Minister and Saudi Crown Prince co-chaired the first summit-level meeting of the India-Saudi Arabia Strategic Partnership Council, SPC. Key highlights of the meeting. Times decision to expedite the implementation of the $50 billion West Coast refinery project, it will involve the construction of a 60 million ton refinery cum petrochemical complex on the Maharashtra coast. It will be a collaborative effort between India, Saudi Arabia, and Abu Dhabi. Times discussions regarding possible cooperation in various infrastructure sectors, including the power grid, gas grid, optical grids, and fiber networks. Times MOUs signed in the fields of new and renewable energy, digitization and electronic manufacturing, enhancing bilateral investment, seawater desalination, etc. The India-Saudi Arabia Strategic Partnership Council. Times it was set up in 2019. Times India is the fourth country with which Riyadh formed such a partnership, after the UK, France, and China. Times aim to establish a high-level council to steer the Indo-Saudi relationship. Times two main pillars, the Committee on Political, Security, Social and Cultural Cooperation, and the Committee on Economy and Investments. Significance Saudi Arabia for India. Times economic partnership, trade with Saudi Arabia accounted for 4.53% of India's total trade inflow Y23. Times energy security, Saudi Arabia is a key partner for ensuring India's energy security and was the third largest crude and petroleum products source for floor Y23. Times geostrategic, Saudi Arabia's strategic location in West Asia makes it crucial to India's foreign policy priorities in the region, including advancing India's Look West policy and cooperation on the proposed India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor. Times defense and security, security cooperation between both countries is significant in combating terrorism and its financing, as well as in the areas of cyber security, maritime security, combating transnational crime, narcotics, and drug trafficking. Times shared interest in multilateral forums and organizations. Saudi Arabia supports India's call for comprehensive reforms of the United Nations Security Council. Overview of India-Saudi Arabia relations. Times diplomatic relations began in 1947 and the bilateral relationship elevated to a strategic partnership in 2010. Times bilateral trade. India is Saudi Arabia's second largest trade partner and Saudi Arabia is India's fourth largest trade partner. Times bilateral exercise. Al Muhaid Al Hindi. 29 WWW. Times trade agreement. Saudi Arabia can play a key role in expediting the stalled India-Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC, Free Trade Agreement, FTA, negotiations. Times Indian diaspora. There are more than 2.4 million Indian expatriates gainfully employed in Saudi Arabia. Times cultural linkage. Saudi is home to the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, known for the annual Hajj and Umrah pilgrimage. Challenges for the relations. Times regional conflicts in the Middle East. The complex and multidimensional politics of the Middle East region pose a challenge. Times diaspora issues. Issues like exploitation of Indian workers, Saudi's policy to provide more jobs to its citizens, and more tax on migrants hamper bilateral relations in the fields of labor and human resources. Times influence of Pakistan. Saudi Arabia's historically close ties with Pakistan can be an issue. Times energy dependency. India is highly dependent on Saudi Arabia for crude oil and natural gas imports. OPEC countries charge Asian premiums, extra charges, from Asian countries while selling oil in comparison to Western countries. Times trade deficit. India's trade deficit with Saudi reached an all-time high in the fiscal year 2022-23. Way forward. Times balanced approach. India and Saudi Arabia will both have to strike a balance in dealing with each other's adversaries. Times bilateral engagements beyond trade and commerce. Both countries would need to improve political and cultural exchanges to realize the vision of a strategic partnership. Times labor welfare. Ensuring the welfare and protection of the large Indian expatriate community in Saudi Arabia is a key priority. Times counter-terrorism. Strengthen cooperation in counter-terrorism efforts and intelligence sharing to combat extremism and ensure stability in the region. 2.7 News in Shorts. 2nd July 2001 International Organization of Legal Metrology, OILM, certificate. Times India has become an OIML certificate issuing authority. Times OIML certificate system is a system for issuing, registering, and using OIML certificates, and their associated tests or reports for measuring instruments e.g., thermometers, clinical thermometers, etc. Times significance, increase in exports, earning of foreign exchange, and generation of employment. 2nd July 2002 United Nations Commission on International Trade Law, UNCITRAL. Times India hosts inaugural UNCITRAL South Asia Conference. Times UNCITRAL, established in 1966, is a subsidiary body of General Assembly of UN with a mandate for further harmonization and unification of law of international trade. Or it is composed of 70 member states elected by General Assembly. All members are elected for terms of 6 years. India is member till 2028. Times UNCITRAL is not a part of WTO. WTO deals with trade policy issues, whereas UNCITRAL deals with laws applicable to private parties in international transactions and is not involved with state-to-state issues. 2nd July 2003 L.69 grouping. Times L.69 grouping, in a meeting hosted by India, called for reform of UN Security Council, UNSC. 30 www.visionias.inf.vision. Times L.69 is a pro-reform grouping that includes developing countries from Africa, Latin America and the Caribbean, Asia and the Pacific. All the countries were united by a common desire to achieve comprehensive reform of UNSC and strengthen multilateralism. India is a leading country in L.69. 2nd July 2004 Five Eyes Alliance. Times it is an intelligence sharing arrangement between US, UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Times under this, intelligence agencies of these 5 countries share signal, military and human intelligence among themselves. 31 www.visionias.inf.vision. 3 Economy. 3.1 Gross Domestic Product,